one of the things that we humans often do is we take something and we try to turn it into a switch. Just
Mhm.
did a podcast on that rather than seeing it as a dial, right?
Mhm.
So a switch. If I just send a text to them, the right text, and I've got some techniques I use for that, or do a tag along, I'll flip the switch and now we're connected. That's not what happens.
Dr. Lee Baucom is a marriage Dr. Lee Baucom is a marriage coach, author of 7 books, and host of the Save the Marriage podcast and Thriveology podcast. For over 2 decades, he's helped thousands of couples pull back from the brink of divorce through his coaching, online programs, and a straightforward philosophy. He can't save your marriage, but he can show you how to. Dr. Baucom specializes in helping individuals break through their internal barriers, fear, identity, and mindset that keep them stuck. And his work has made him a trusted voice for anyone who wants to do the hard, important work of transforming their relationship. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Baucom. I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, generally, the way that I like to start these podcasts is to kind of get a background history of your story in terms of what your journey was to doing the work that you're doing today. So, we had gone over this a little bit in our introductory call, but you actually started out as a therapist rather than a coach.
That is correct. Yes. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I spent a lot of years and several degrees getting
Mm-hmm.
trained as a therapist
Mm-hmm.
and was actually in the middle of writing my dissertation. We were in a small house. My wife was on the couch behind me, and I'm just writing. And I was reading an article for background stuff, and it was about this new occupation of coaching,
Mm-hmm.
personal coaching. And this was in the mid 90s, early to mid 90s. And I turned to my wife and I said, "This is kind of how I do my work already." And so she said, "Well, what are you going to do now that you've done all this training?" And I was already actually practicing as a therapist. And I said, "Well, I guess I better do some more training." And so I did 3 more years of training as a coach. And over the
Mm-hmm.
years, have moved away from the therapy office. I left the therapy practice about 9 or 10 years ago, and have been a coach and calling myself that since then. I was already doing that work. So that's how the transition happened. And
Mm-hmm.
along the way, the reason I left therapy was because I saw the ineffectiveness of marital therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was frustrated with the fact that it wasn't helping couples to find their way forward. And after you complain about something for a while, you probably ought to say what you do think. And so I wrote a book, and that book ended up being the cornerstone of the Save the Marriage system. And that then led to other books and other programs online since then.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive into that a little bit because I think a lot of the time there is this like therapy and coaching is similar but different. Like what would you say are the main similarities but also the main differences between coaching, and why do you think that coaching seems to be more effective than therapy?
Yeah, so there are two angles to that. Let me go with what's the difference between coaching and therapy first a little bit, and then talk about why marital therapy in particular has some issues.
Mhm.
So individual therapy has proven to be effective for people moving beyond painful points. But that is kind of the focus of therapy, like what's wrong in the past, what's happened to
Mhm.
you that's led you to
Mhm.
here. Coaching is more situated in where do you want to get to, and what's the space between that? What's the gap between where you are and where you want to be? It's not
Mhm.
that therapy can't have that component as much as it generally doesn't go from that approach. It's trying to say, here's what happened to you, here's how you cope and move forward. Coaching doesn't necessarily only look forward, but that's generally the way it is. Often I'm referencing where people have been and what's happened to them,
Mhm.
but we're aiming for something else.
Mhm.
That often changes the situation from a problem focus to a goal focus, like where do we want to get to?
Mm.
And so overall, that is the kind of the a space between coaching and therapy. But to narrow down to marital therapy, there are some clear reasons why marital therapy itself is not effective as opposed to individual therapy. Now, one is a training issue. So
Mm.
most places that license therapists to do therapy, not a particular brand of therapy or type of therapy or style of therapy. That's up to the therapist to decide what is within their realm of practice, which means that in most places, if an individually trained therapist notices that there are couples coming to them for therapy, they can call themselves a marriage therapist without any training in that particular method. And the problem is there is a very specific difference between individual therapy in mindset and marital therapy in mindset. Relational
Mm.
therapy or systems therapy would be a better approach. I saw it because I was trained as an individual therapist, then branched over to the marital and family therapy world, the systems view. And
Mhm.
so I had a foot in both worlds. So if you don't have that orientation, you struggle to figure out who your client is in the room. I've talked to a lot of people who say, I'm a marriage therapist, and I'll say, then tell me who your client is in the room. And they'll
Mhm.
either tell me the client was who contacted them or both people are. And in a relationship situation, neither of those answers are correct. The answer is the relationship. That's
Mhm.
what we're here to work on. So that orientation gets in the way, especially when
Mhm.
there's a disagreement between the people coming in. Like, how do you choose your client in that situation?
Mhm.
And so that's a problem. A second problem is that we have often defaulted, especially in the United States, to seeing the problem in marriage therapy or marriages as being a communication problem. So the therapy situation brings it to communication. Communication is not the problem in most situations. Um, Communication is merely a way of moving information across from one person to another. So it's just a delivery device. What matters is what you're delivering. So
Mhm.
communication between people who are connected and loving each other communicates love and connection. If you are talking about people who are in a struggling relationship that are disconnected and hurting, that's what they express in their communication. And so communication, giving tools of communication doesn't fix that. You're just giving new tools for the same problem.
Mhm.
So that has been a default mechanism. Another problem is that many times, if not most of the time, when people go to marriage therapy, they are not both equally wanting to be there.
Mhm.
When both people do want to be there, when both people are on board with that, I mean, as I've said to my therapist buddies, a bad therapist can still have a great outcome when two people are there to work on their relationship. But if one of them doesn't want to be there, a great therapist is going to have a hard time making progress because the person who doesn't want to be there entrenches themselves in the fact that they don't want to be there. So they
Mhm.
dig the ditch deeper and study themselves more deeply and convince themselves further of why they can't work on
Mhm.
this.
Mhm.
And um, let's switch over to marriage coaching. I don't need both people. To do marital therapy, you need both people there by definition. To do marriage coaching or relationship coaching, I don't need both people there. I can work with a person who's ready to move forward and find some ways of responding differently, which means that if there is somebody who doesn't want to be there, we don't have to include them.
Mhm.
And that is, in fact, one of my core rules. If I'm going to coach people, that if I'm going to coach the couple, they both have to be on the same page about moving forward. They don't have to commit to saving their marriage, but they do have to be willing to move forward. If not, I'm happy to work with the person who by themselves wants to work on this and turn it around until their spouse decides to join the process.
Mhm.
So that gives me a lot more latitude than a marriage therapist would have. So for lots of reasons, marriage therapy has proven itself to be pretty ineffective to the point that it's about 50-50 whether somebody going to therapy is going to stay married or not. That's about the same as the general population in
Mhm.
most places. And only 10 to 15% report that it helped them at all. And
Mhm.
that's across a number of different studies. So when people say, hey, I had great results with my marriage therapy, my response is, that's an anecdote. Like, I'm glad it
Mhm.
was good for you, but that's anecdotal. The statistics show that it's not particularly effective for people.
So why do you think that's because there's one person who like fundamentally usually doesn't want to be there, or do you think it's because the focus in therapy is on the past versus the future, or why do you think that what's the fundamental reason why therapy versus coaching? And also, what is the effectiveness of marriage coaching versus therapy? Do you get a lot more results or better results?
So I can speak for what I tracked when I
Mhm.
was doing coaching with people. So I'm not counting people who are in my online programs because I have no way of knowing what they're doing
Yeah.
with that. But people I coached
Mhm.
directly for a number of years, I did follow up, and
Mhm.
we had an 80% effectiveness. It was
Wow.
a little over that, but so
Mhm.
I mean that's what 30% better, something like that. Anyway,
Yeah,
it's
that's
a
significant.
sizable increase, right?
Mhm.
So why does it not work? Well, all of those reasons. There are multiple possibilities for marriage therapy to not work. You've got somebody who's not trained, that's a possibility. That
Mhm.
they then sit there and talk about communication, that's
Mhm.
another. One of the things I often noticed because I helped teach people how to do marriage and family therapy.
Mhm.
I watched the training as I was going through it. I saw my colleagues, I saw my mentors, and I watched myself. And almost immediately, you would have a couple who came in, it sounded like they were, like, in a pretty good mood, right? They would come I would hear them in my office, I would hear them at where I was getting trained, and they come in and they're laughing and talking together, and then they leave the therapy session angry with each other, and the reason is because they did the, um, problem of the week, and so
Mm.
you go in and say, "So, how are you doing?" And people often will go from, "How are you doing?" to, "Here's what went wrong this past week." And because
Mm.
you think you're trying to fix those problems, you can get rooted into those problems. I'm not saying we disregard the problems. It's just that when the focus every week is, "So how are you?" we get a negative effect. Oftentimes, you've got a therapist who is working with a couple where one doesn't want to be there at all, and so
Mhm.
that sets it up for failure.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I have been very clear about in my own work is that I believe when you're working with couples, you should be on the side of the relationship until
Mhm.
proven otherwise. Right? You
Mhm.
start on the side. So, back to kind of the analogies I use. If I go to the doctor and I've got my arm hanging at this weird angle, and the doctor looks at it and says, "Yeah, that arm is broken. Did you want to do something about it?" That's not what I want from the doctor. I want the doctor to say, "Hey, let's get that fixed. Let's make sure that
Mhm.
it's functioning as well as we can, and
Mhm.
then we'll deal with what we can't." Right? And that's
Mhm.
so starting on the side of let's get this going because that's why people come to marriage therapy. I mean, they're not
Mhm.
there for other reasons. They want to have a better relationship.
Mhm.
So I start on the side of the relationship. The
Mhm.
second thing I do is try to provide roadmaps for people to understand what they're trying to do.
Mhm.
My core belief is that most people, when they get married, do not know how to have a great marriage. It's not
Mm.
in our training.
Mhm.
If you had parents that did not have a great marriage, you've seen the results of that. If you had parents that did have a great marriage, you probably didn't see what caused that because it's quiet. It's behind doors, right? There's something that you can't always see. You're just seeing the outward signs of that, not the inner workings of that. So
Mhm.
people walk into marriage unprepared for the challenge of that. And I've often said, well, we do more work to teach people how to drive a car than we ever do with teaching people how to have a great marriage.
Mhm.
And part of the reason for that is because people believe that they have what it takes. So I know I'm rambling a bit, but let me just add this in and then we can move forward. I used to see all of the couples who were getting married in 7 places of faith in the community where my office was. The ministers there did not want to do the premarital work, and so they turned it over to me. And so I saw a lot of couples.
Mhm.
And on the sly, one of my jobs I felt was to pick a fight with them, between them, not with
Mhm.
me, but between
Mhm.
them
Mhm.
to help them see that they didn't have everything nailed down. So then we could start nailing some things down, helping them have
Mhm.
some conversations that were important. So one of the things I would ask them is, if I walk down the street and ask somebody, what are your chances of staying in your marriage? What success rates for a marriage? What would it be? And most people would say roughly a coin toss. I mean, it's a little better than that, but let's call it that. It's roughly a
Mhm.
coin toss. So why is it you think that you've already beat the odds? Because if you didn't think you'd beat the odds, you wouldn't be doing this. So what is it
Mhm.
that leads you to think that you've already beat the odds on that? And to a couple, they would say, because we have the real love.
Mhm.
And that presumes that the 50% who didn't make it didn't have real love. And I know that's not the case. They are misjudging what makes for a successful marriage. And so they're
Mm.
already convinced that they have this beat. Like they've already
Mhm.
beat the odds. They're ready to go, and they're not.
Mhm. Well, I think that's an interesting rabbit hole to go down, actually, because the idea that marriage is about love is actually a fairly recent invention. And, let's say in the past 100 years or something. And before, marriage was a contract, it was, essentially a business deal, between families, especially when you start getting into the higher ups. And so I think that's really interesting that people these days think marriage is only about love because when you comes down to it, like my personal philosophy is that love is not enough. Yes, it's
Hmm.
great to have love, but you need to have other things as well. You need to have similar ideas about finances. You need to have similar ideas about ambition. You need to have similar ideas about lifestyle. You need to have similar ideas about kids, and things like that. And those are all the things that don't necessarily get talked about before going into a marriage. And what people I think don't realize is that marriage is more than just, love and sex. It's all the things that make a healthy partnership, And so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm glad we've gotten past the business deal frame of marriage for sure.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
you're correct that it's a new idea. The expectations that creates can often be problematic, um,
Mhm.
and there is so if we don't have a roadmap, it's not surprising that people get lost in the forest
Mhm.
because they are
Mhm.
expecting this. Oh, we'll just be together and wander through the forest, and it'll all be successful and find themselves very lost. And then I would say they then get separated in the forest.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
my core belief about why marriages get into trouble is will follow with what you said. It's that people expect their relationship is now set, right? They've fallen in love. They've done all the work to build their relationship. They built this connection. Now they're going to take it on for life. They're going to make a
Mhm.
commitment to be in this for the rest of their lives. They walk into marriage and then I call it hitting the pause button.
Mhm.
Um, because they go, okay, we've got this. We'll come back to us. But we need to turn our attention to parenting, career development, friends, aging parents, hobbies, interests, whatever it is. But something needs that energy that I've been investing all this time into this relationship. That energy now needs to go these other things. But we're okay because we have this relationship established. So for subconscious actions, they hit the pause button,
Mhm.
and that leads to disconnection.
Mhm.
And so even if they peripherally agree on some things ahead of time, they stop having conversations about what that means. So
Mhm.
to your point about money and kids and all those other stress points, I believe that successful marriages also, along with working on their connection, also see it as a team. I call it being a
Mhm.
we. We are in
Mhm.
this together. We
Mhm.
are a team. And that team thinking helps them navigate the money questions, the parenting questions, the sex questions, the how do you deal with the in-laws, and even the struggles around religion or politics or those kinds of things. And so
Mhm.
that's the big five of
Yeah.
problem spots. And if you're seeing that as are we working at it as a team or are we turning against each other?
Mhm.
And that I think those are the two options. If you have
Mhm.
two people in a relationship, they can either see each other as an asset and a team with each other, or they can turn against each other and see who can best the other. And
Mhm.
so I certainly agree that love is not enough. Having a team mindset is helpful, and working on the connection is the
Mhm.
other piece that when you hit the pause button begins to fall away.
Mhm. What do you think are the reasons why people either don't necessarily go into the marriage having that team mindset, or that mindset kind of falls away after a certain point. Because I feel like in marital, or even just general relational, it's very easy to point the finger and say, like, you did this, you did that, right? And so, what do you think causes people to go from this mindset of team and we're a we, to kind of like, you did this, you did that, and pointing the finger at each other?
So the first cause of it is people don't know that's what they're trying to do. They
Mhm.
think it is you and me, like that,
Mhm.
because that's what is true before you get married. That is what is true. It's you and me, and
Mhm.
we can get along together and we can make decisions together. But it's you and me,
Mhm.
and so they don't see that there is a true transformation that happened or can happen when you just say, for the rest of my life, I'm with you in this. That is the
Mhm.
commitment of marriage. And so suddenly there is this new thing that could be created, but they don't have a conceptualization of that because it doesn't
Mhm.
happen anywhere else. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I think that even those who get near it, if they hit the pause button, so the ones I hear a lot of times people say, well, what we were doing was the divide and conquer kind of approach.
Mhm.
And by dividing, they mean they divided themselves rather than the real meaning of that little strategy for warfare, which is divide the enemy and conquer the
Mhm.
enemy because there's
Mhm.
less of them to conquer. And
Mhm.
so they divide themselves. You do this, I'll do this. Then they operate in their own spheres, which creates some resentments of why are you not helping me in this? It also
Mhm.
creates some frustrations of how dare you enter into this? This is my arena. And all of these places begin to be kind of landmines that they don't know and they can't
Mhm.
cross back over to each other. As disconnection begins to gain a foothold in the relationship, we happen to know that there are a lot of other pieces that come out of like disrespect. When
Mhm.
people aren't connected, they begin to disrespect and disregard each other, all the way down to disdain, which
Mhm.
is the extreme of disconnection. And part of their task is to figure out, can they turn it around earlier? If I find that I'm disinterested, which is one of the early indicators, I might go, gosh, what's going on and how can I plug myself back into this relationship?
Mhm.
At disrespect, somebody probably is calling the other on the fact that I'm feeling disrespected by you. Disregarded
Mhm.
decisions are being made and I have nothing to do with it, and that feels bad. You keep on traipsing down and it gets harder and harder to rebuild back because the resentment begins to be deeper in. And what we know from any pain, registering of pain in humans is that when we register pain, we become focused on that is hurting me, not how
Mhm.
I might be a part of the process, right? So
Mhm.
if I hit my hand, the only thing I'm aware of is my hand is hurting. And so if I'm
Mhm.
disconnected from my spouse, what I'm aware of is I'm feeling disconnected from you, not how I might be a part of the process,
Mhm.
but how you are not giving me what I need. And
Mhm.
so the gulf kind of grows between them and they don't have any way of finding the route back until one finally says, this is not okay.
Mhm.
And once one person says that, the question is, where do they turn at that point?
And so then, is that like, I guess, sometimes some of these issues, they come on so gradually or so subtly that you don't always know that you're in it until it's almost too late. So, what are some warning signs, or like what are some of the signals that you would tell people to look out for in terms of making sure that they don't go too far down that road to like disrespect and disdain?
Yeah. So the reason that people don't notice it is because they have created momentum in their relationship. Like that feeling of love and connection that they walk in with does carry them a while, even after they have begun to stop being in connection. It just
Mhm.
feels like they are, right? And so some of the things I see early on are people feeling like they have siloed down, like they're sitting on a couch together and each has their phone in their hand and they're no
Mhm.
longer doing what they used to do of let's talk together and join
Mhm.
together. And so the face-to-face time begins to
Mhm.
diminish.
Mhm.
Another one that I often see is feeling more and more like roommates. So
Mhm.
they can, that often is an early stage of going, we just no longer do the connecting things. We're just roommates.
Mhm.
We're coexisting together. The energy begins to move away from between us to other things, that's a
Mhm.
pretty clear indicator. Anytime I hear somebody say, there's time for us later, they're already setting the trap.
Yeah.
Once the kids are at this stage, whatever it is, and it's always a little ahead, or once my career is at this point, it's always a little
Mhm.
ahead,
Mhm.
then they know that they have begun to divert their attention away from each other. And
Mhm.
anytime we divert attention away from each other as humans needing to be connected, we're going to begin to feel that. That's going to begin to register on some level. So those are the
Mhm.
very early signs. One of the things I often ask people is, "Where's the energy now? Like,
Mhm.
where do you put it?" Because if I'm not getting connection from my spouse where I am expecting to get it, where it's supposed to be the more connected relationship, I can start asking the question, then where am I getting it?
Mhm.
Am I investing heavily in the kids? Am I investing heavily in my job or my workers at work, or friends, or hobbies, or these other places, even somebody outside of the marriage? All of those would be, the ways that people continue to try to get that connection.
Mhm.
So as the energy begins to flow, not towards each other, but begins to divert away, that's a pretty good
Mhm.
indicator that they have certainly hit the pause button and are beginning to strain the relationship. And the strain doesn't show up immediately.
Mhm.
So we're talking about pretty subtle signs here. It may be useful just for my modeling to talk about the three levels of connection, because then people can go, where are we on those levels of connection?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the basic level, well, let's not call it the basic level, but the one that we experience with lots of other creatures is physical connection.
Mhm.
So Clementine, my puppy, is beside me on her bed, and tonight when I sit down on the couch, she will be smack up against me because that makes her feel safe, and
Mhm.
she wants me to know that she's connected with me. Right? That's
Mhm.
that's what we do with as warm-blooded creatures. We tend
Mhm.
to do the physical connection. And so any loving touch is what fits in there. Often when I say that, people say, "Oh, you mean sex?" And my response is, "Well, no. I mean, yes, that is one way, but no, there are lots of other ways that we do that:
Mhm.
holding hands, hugging, kissing, pats on
Mhm.
the back, just being up against each other if we're watching TV, just like
Mhm.
Clem is with me." So
Mhm.
that's physical connection, and that's nonverbal. You don't
Mhm.
talk about hugging; you hug, right? That's just
Mhm.
it's a nonverbal action.
Mhm.
The next level would be emotional connection. And that's where we bring in our language, but it also has nonverbal components. So as we're talking and you're in agreement, you're kind of nodding along because, by the way, these three levels of connections are how we form all connections in our life.
Mhm.
So it's not just the marriage relationship, that's just where it's the deepest. So
Mhm.
emotional connection has two clear components to it. One is that I get you, you get me. So
Mhm.
that has a lot of nonverbal to it. Many times, my wife and I have looked at each other when our kids were doing something, and just kind of gave each other the, well, what do we do here thing, and
Mhm.
where we knew we got each other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's also the way if she laughs at my jokes, right? And I
Mhm.
go, okay, you get me, right? You get my
Mhm.
sense of humor, and I get
Mhm.
your sense of humor. So that's the get. And then there's the support.
Mhm.
Do we support each other, whether it's a good day or a bad day?
Mhm.
And that level does require both the verbal and nonverbal.
Mhm.
My wife or I could be talking about a rough day, and it doesn't take words for the other person to nod along and give facial expressions, and you go, "Okay, we're in this together, right? We're a team."
Mhm. Mhm.
That's emotional connection. I want to come back and talk about what that looks like when they think it's emotional connection, but it's not. But let me finish this up before we lose that. And the other level is spiritual connection.
Mhm.
And when I say spiritual connection, that's when people say, "Oh, you mean religion?" And my reaction is, well, no, but I mean, yes, in some ways, because our religious beliefs reveal our core values.
Mhm.
And this is the place of values. It's a place of
Mhm.
what's important to us, of
Mhm.
what we have as goals in our life, what we have as fears in our life, what we have as the deepest places of meaning and purpose in our lives.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing is, back to those couples that would come in and tell me their story, they almost always had this moment where they went, "That's when I fell in love." I knew
Mhm.
I was attracted to this person. We built up some connection, but we had this conversation about where they wanted to go in life, where they came from in life, and what was important to them. And that's when I knew I loved them.
Mhm.
That's because this level is something we don't generally share with too many other people in our lives, and certainly not to the depth that that conversation has.
Mhm.
So of those, we might, hug our friends, we might support our friends and get our friends, and might sometimes talk about what's deeply meaningful to us. But we do that more deeply, or have the capacity of doing that more deeply with the person with whom we're sharing that journey together. And in
Mhm.
fact, that's why that's so important, because you're trying to build this journey together. And so many people tell me that they had the conversation 2, 3 times, but they didn't know that it was this connection point, and so they stopped having the connection, and surprised when they one day discover that on the spiritual side of things, they are far apart,
Mhm.
that they have different, wants and hopes and dreams than the other, because they haven't kept each other up to date on that.
Mhm.
So that one is often the one of the ones that goes away very quickly. People just don't
Mhm.
register that. But the emotional one is one that people often tell me they thought they were doing, because they talk about their day, and they talk about it something like this: "How was your day?" "Oh, I had 2 meetings and I had to get in a report, and I had to deal with whatever." That is
Mhm.
not how your day was. That was a report of your day.
Mhm.
And so reporting is the substitute that people make for rapporting. Having an emotional connection is having a rapport with somebody. And so, how was your day is, "Oh, I had a really tough meeting. The boss really, was frustrating me, blah, blah, blah." That would be a much more emotional connection. But instead, they default to, "I did this, I did this, I did this." Or the kids did this, they did this, they did this. And so it's a
Mhm.
reporting mechanism rather than the rapporting.
Mhm.
That's for me, is a sign that they have already done a lot of emotional disconnection.
Mhm.
Then they often tell me that the physical connection is either waning or non-existent, that they used to be very affectionate with each other. They're not so affectionate with each other. They no longer make time for being intimate with each other. And that piece begins to fall away too.
Mhm.
And that's the disconnection. That's the pause button. They're doing it because the energy that was put into all of that is now displaced somewhere else.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things that I hear a lot of is like you put so much energy into showing up for work, but then you come home and your family or your partner just gets the scraps of your
Mhm.
energy, right? And so it's about, like, yes, you want to show up for your work, but you also want to show up for your partner and show up for your relationship. And so it's kind of learning to have a balance there as well, right?
Yeah. And that is a regular feed. We've only got so much energy. You're correct.
Mhm.
It's a regular feed. The question is whether we see the connecting with a spouse as being a net loss
Mhm.
or gain.
Mhm.
And if I go, I just don't have any more energy to put into a relationship, I'm missing the fact that that relationship might feed me with some energy. Like if
Mhm.
I sat down and talked about my day with my spouse, I might feel better at the end of that, because I've had a chance to debrief and have someone go, "Hey, I still love you, and we're still in this
Mhm.
together, no matter how bad the day was," or "Yay, we can celebrate
Mhm.
that together." Right? That feels like a net loss when it should feel like a net gain to have those
Mhm.
connection points. Um, let's go back to the physical connection. We know that there are some pretty deep biological reactions that happen in physical contact
Mhm.
that are recharging. So saying, "I don't have time for a 20-second hug," is a bit of a rationalization for avoiding the contact, when that
Mhm.
actually creates a cascade in your body that helps to reset the nervous system.
Mhm.
Um, I've had people who will say, I'm so tired. I just don't have anything else to give." I'm like, what does it take for you to sit side by side in connection on the couch to watch TV or to read,
Mhm.
even look on your phone together, but at least be in contact with each other? What
Yeah.
is the net time that requires?
Mhm.
And what I notice is that a lot of times people overestimate what the time or energy requirement is to do that connection.
Mhm.
And so they avoid it.
Mhm.
And when they avoid it, they make it they sink it a little bit further, and it's a
Yeah.
little bit further down. And so, yes, these are balance points, but it's also seeing that there is often a gain that could come from that connection.
So, do you think that in general, like, there's a hesitancy to talk about these kinds of things openly as well? Because I mean, I know we talked about communication, and communication isn't everything, right? But like, do you think at a certain point that couples, because they go into it, as you had said, they go into it thinking like love conquers all, and we have the true love or whatever, that they forget or neglect the fact that sometimes these things need to be communicated, and maybe it's not sexy, but maybe we need to plan for like half an hour after work every day, we just sit and snuggle on the couch or something, or maybe we need to plan a date night, or maybe we need to plan intimacy, which again is not super sexy, but at the same time, does that help?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let's go back a little bit. When I say the thing about communication, a lot of people think that I'm anti-communication. I'm just pointing out that every way of connecting is a communication, right?
Mhm.
But you're communicating connection.
Mhm.
And when people are just saying, "Tell me how to communicate better," I've often said to people, if that's all I'm teaching you, just a technique of communicating better, I'm just going to teach you better ways of arguing and fighting. I'm not going
Mhm.
to teach you better ways of resolving the underlying connection. So you have to
Mhm.
see that as just it's these are pipes. What are you
Mhm.
sending through the pipes? Are you sending through connection or disconnection? So
Mhm.
communication is a piece for sure. And there are times when conversations need to be had that are hard, that are difficult, that are scary.
Mhm.
That's part of being in a relationship. But let's go with a couple of things you said. Scheduling is a beginning point. A lot of people find that what they're actually trying to do is rediscover the habits, because nobody said when they were dating, we need to set aside 30 minutes to snuggle on the couch. It just happened, right? But they were
Mhm.
in habits of doing that. And now, when you're out of the habit, you have to find some ways of doing that. So I've had couples who have come up with multiple ways. So yes, sitting on the couch and catching up on the last things of the day, but being in connection with each other, just physically close to each other. Some
Mhm.
did that. Some said, we have 15 minutes on the back deck where we're sharing a cup of tea, a cup of wine, a cup of whatever, and talking about how the day was. Really getting to
Mhm.
how the day was.
Mhm.
Um, Many people find that they do have to say, if we are going to have a physical relationship, meaning a sexual relationship, we're going to have to schedule that.
Mhm.
And what they often find is once they get past that sounds so artificial, is you also can relax into that. Instead of going, oh, well, I wonder when that's going to happen. You go, oh,
Mhm.
okay, we set aside Friday evening or Saturday morning or whenever it
Mhm.
is, so
Mhm.
I can, kind of relax into that. And
Mhm.
it gets away from the whole, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? That often
Mhm.
happens in disconnected relationships. So,
Mhm.
yes, that's useful. Let me say something though about date night that I think many people miss. Date night can often pressure a disconnected relationship in a way that people don't expect. They
Mm.
expect that the date night is going to solve the problem. Date night with a connected couple almost is like just creating those habits again.
Mhm.
So my wife and I will go to dinner and a movie and not think about it as, oh, we had to do date night. That's just what we do because we're like, hey, I want to see that movie together. Let's try out that new place together. It just happens. When people decide that that is the starting point for them rebuilding, they often are at a deficit of connection. And now they're creating a high pressure situation that requires enough underlying connection for it to happen. So now they have to, you know, find where to go, get reservations, find babysitters for the kids, dress up
Mhm.
together, and then find some way of having a conversation when none of that has been true. And so that happens once, twice maybe, and then they suddenly can't find reservations or can't find a babysitter or they're
Mhm.
just too tired or too
Mm.
whatever. And suddenly it falls off again,
Mhm.
not because it was a bad idea as much as it was a premature idea for the level of connection that they were at.
Yeah.
So instead, people start. So I think about it as having a connection account between a couple, right?
Mhm.
And But if both people are depositing into it, their connection account grows and they have
Mhm.
this connection capital, which means that when they do have a tough time or a tough conversation, it doesn't withdraw too much. It doesn't send it into a negative place in the relationship. But when we stop making deposits, hit the pause button, and we stop making the deposits in that account, it doesn't mean that there aren't fees associated, because when we're doing that, there are service fees that just happen because we end up with
Mhm.
resentment and frustrations about that. And it continues to draw down the account until it's at a negative balance.
Mhm.
And then people want to suddenly be able to invest that money somewhere, but there's nothing to invest. They
Mhm.
don't have the capital, the connection capital there. So they're trying to make small deposits. And so if one person, which is generally the case, says, you know what, this isn't where I want things to be, I'm going to do something to work on this.
Mhm.
They don't have to expect the spouse to immediately pick up on that. And they can say, okay, we're at a withdrawn state. I'm going to have to keep making these deposits until we're at a positive balance.
Mhm.
And then the spouse often will step back in and want to be in connection because there is a positive balance. They're like, okay, this is a worthwhile account. I'll keep
Mhm.
managing it. And so knowing that you might be making those deposits a while can be relieving for the person who's doing it, instead of going, this will be it. I'll do
Mhm.
this thing and now we'll be ready to go. I'll set up date night and we'll be ready to go, or I'll show them my their love language for a couple of
Mhm.
things and then we'll be ready to go. No, it's a small, you're withdrawn, and how
Mhm.
withdrawn you are determines how long you have to keep the deposits up until you get to a place where you suddenly have some capital.
Mhm. So how does that work then? Because this is a concept that I wanted to talk about, where one person seems to be more invested in trying to save the marriage than the other. And so, what does when you have a client and there's only one person coming to you for this, like, what does that look like in a coaching capacity? But also, how do you like? If I was in a marriage and I had talked to my spouse about like, "Hey, these are things aren't working and can we work on it?" and they just had 0 interest in it, how do I not become even more resentful of my partner for like, I went to them, I was vulnerable, I said, "This isn't working, I wanna work on it," but now they're like, "F you," kinda thing, "I don't care," and so then how do you kind of manage that to get to a place where you don't get tired or resentful of putting into the relationship when your partner isn't?
Yeah, great question. So one piece of that is being able to recognize that, sure, they had a negative reaction at that moment, but it's likely that along the way, both people have been part of the disconnection, right?
Mhm.
So while they at that point might have a negative reaction because you're the one who's gone, we got a problem, they're not at
Mhm.
that point.
Mhm.
But both people were contributing to the disconnection.
Mhm.
So we back up a little bit and go, okay, we were both in this place. I have decided to move forward. I'm not going to expect them to be at the positive. Again, that at that point, the connection account is overdrawn. So
Mhm.
I'm starting at that negative point. So then how can I begin to build that, recognizing that I may not get anything back for a bit? Just
Mhm.
accepting that. I can
Mhm.
internalize that and go, okay, I'm going to be okay with this. And so people sometimes set a time frame for themselves. Sometimes they just say, I'm going to keep working at this to see. I would suggest that if it has been a long-term thing, you're not talking about days, maybe not even weeks. It may take even months before you start seeing much traction.
Mhm.
And at that point, I'm looking for, is there an openness to receive those things, or is there
Mhm.
a maliciousness coming back? Like
Mhm.
the person is not just, a little hesitant about responding, but they're actually attacking in their response. They're reacting to what's coming their way. That's a different kind of matter. But many times, what you get is kind of flat response or a confused response. Like,
Mhm.
what are you doing? Why are you doing this?
Mhm.
And just to be able to say, I just wanted to be closer to you is fine. It's all
Mhm.
is required. A lot of times people start talking about what they're trying to build. And the problem is that we often force somebody to react in a negative way to the effort, to be able to say, I don't want to get your hopes up. We're disconnected. Then there's the other side of that of the person going, what do you mean there's something wrong with our relationship? We're just at a stage. We're just at a place, right? And so there's the benign, I'm just not interested. And then there's the confused, what is this about? So we found some ways around that by instead of, all right, so back to Clementine. If I let her in my backyard and I need her to come back, if I'm not careful, I can create a game for her. And the game is that I come try to catch her, right? And she starts running. And the faster I run, the faster she runs. And she thinks it's a great fun. And I don't find it so fun. But so I don't do that. I try to invite her back to me. So a treat in my hand is a way of inviting her to come back to me. I'm not chasing her. So there's the chaser-spacer dynamic that I talk about, where when you really want it, you can end up chasing after the other person. And what are they going to do? They're going to space. They're going to create this safe space for them. And the task is to be the pacer. How can I pace this process so that I'm being invitational? So we've already talked about date night. So let's use that as an example. Date night has a lot of overwhelmingness to it that we've already talked about. And so instead of saying, you know what, we're disconnected, we need to catch up with each other, so let's do date night, that puts a lot of pressure. You could say, hey, I just heard about this restaurant up the road that has really good sandwiches. I was thinking of going and trying it out for lunch. Would you like to go with me? Now, that is not a date. It's, I'm going to do this. Would you like to tag along, which is what I call it. It's a tag along. Would you like to tag along with me? And if they say, no, you go, okay, well, that's fine. Would you like me to bring you back a sandwich because I'm headed out? And so now we've made it so that there's not some hidden thing that we're trying to do. And the only piece that is true to it is that you're trying to spend some time with that person. So that is factual. But we weren't trying to get them there to have a secret date night. It really was there to just enjoy each other. So let's say that you contact me and say, hey, Lee, do you want to go get a cup of coffee? I'm like, oh, man, I'm busy. I wish I could. And you go get your cup of coffee, but I'm still sitting there going, well, it's really nice that she wanted to get a cup of coffee with me. That feels good. That there's a connection embedded even in saying that, even in the setup of that. That doesn't require the person to say yes. It's still there, even if they say no. If they say yes, then you just go have a light lunch together. That's a deposit into that account. Either way, it's a deposit into the account. So that is a way of inviting connection without chasing it.
I find that's a really interesting concept, though, because and maybe I just have a different view on marriage, but unless I was going for coffee with somebody else, or going for lunch with somebody else, I would almost inherently think like I'm going for lunch, like my partner's coming with me, but maybe that's just because of the way that I grew up and the way that that I see my parents' marriage. And so for me, that's very natural. Like they go for dinner together, they go for lunch together, and it's not even a question, for them to go together. It's just of course they're going together.
For a disconnected couple, it is a question.
Yeah.
They've created their own arenas. And so then there is the possibility, because I've seen this too, where they go out and so they are at the same place, but all they're doing is looking, eyes on the phone. So their agenda is not each other. And so that's when the person can make sure that they don't fall into that and invite a conversation. So even if they decide they're just naturally going together, there are ways to continue that connection. But I will tell you, having watched this over and over, that when people are at that point of disconnection, they're not doing coffee together. They're not doing lunch together. They are doing their own little worlds together. So they might be doing lunch with their friends. They might be doing lots of other things, but they're not doing it with each other. And so that is a switch for them to do the tag along. They go on walks, alone. So saying, hey, I'm going to go take a walk after dinner. Would you like to go with me? Also a tag along. I'm going to walk the dog. Would you like to go with me? Tag along. So when they are that disconnected, that actually isn't is often not happening at all. So that's
Mhm.
a whole, and they have to decide that they might be rejected.
Mhm.
And that's when I kind of point out that even if they say no, that's while it feels rejecting, I just want to note that there is still a carryover of connection in that
Mhm.
process.
Mhm. So that still counts as a deposit into the account.
It's
Mhm.
a smaller one than if they went with you and you had a nice conversation, but it's still your deposit.
Mhm.
You've made the deposit.
Mhm. Mhm. So then when you have clients coming, like singular clients coming to you for coaching, that kind of one of the main things that you teach them in terms of that and to build up that account, or are there other things that you go through with them? And then what's the difference between coaching a singular person versus coaching the couple together?
Yeah. Um, So that is a technique that I might share with somebody that fits the principle of connecting with them. So first, we're
Mhm.
talking about what are the principles of working on this. Um, One of the things that we humans often do is we take something and we try to turn it into a switch. Just
Mhm.
did a podcast on that rather than seeing it as a dial, right?
Mhm.
So a switch. If I just send a text to them, the right text, and I've got some techniques I use for that, or do a tag along, I'll flip the switch and now we're connected. That's not what happens. A dial is more like I'm dialing up the connection a little bit and then dialing
Mhm.
it up a little bit more. And so they have to have some understandings in mind in order for that to be a technique that helps rather than a kind of a manipulation.
Mhm.
So that is something I use to help them understand how to do that. But coaching is also so that I coach across three C's. The
Mhm.
connect with your spouse. And so we talk about what does that look like? Where did it go wrong? How can you start improving it? How can you move forward with that? So that's connect. Change yourself. Change, connect, change, and create. Those are the three
Mhm.
C's. The change is often about the person realizing that they've stagnated in areas of their life because that's what adults often do.
Mhm.
That's the nature of what
Mhm.
happens to people as they get hit adulthood. They believe that they've kind of finished, like they're
Mhm.
as far as they need to go.
Mhm.
And that's not the case. We are
Mhm.
constantly growing as people and finding new ways of being. And so, Ray Kroc, who founded McDonald's, his one of his sayings was, "You're either green and growing or ripe and rotting." And many people
Mhm.
have gotten to the place where they think that they're done. They're
Mhm.
ripe. That's right at rotting. So I'm believing that people are green and growing, can be green and growing from birth to the grave. And so
Mhm.
it's more about going, how do I want to show up? How do I need to re-engage myself with the world? Where have I grown stagnant? So that's the change. We talk about that and find some places to do that in the coaching. And the other is create a
Mhm.
new path. And that is recognizing that people who are at that state have not created that we, have not created the team.
Mhm.
And a lot of the thinking around that is internal. It's not between them, it's internal. How do I
Mhm.
think about our money, for instance? How do I
Mhm.
think about us parenting? How do I think about all these areas? Am I doing it as my money versus your money? Or am I thinking of it as our resource? Now we have to figure out how to deal with that.
Mhm.
There's a lot of that. I mean, I don't have a scientific study of this, but I think probably upwards of 80% of what happens in we happens internally. And then
Mhm.
that flows between you because of the way you think about that then changes how you approach it.
Mhm.
So even if their spouse is not at that point engaged, for them to begin thinking about us,
Mhm.
we, the team,
Mhm.
changes the interactions between them and can
Mhm.
begin to help reset their relationship.
Mhm. Do you find that there's oh, and we don't have to go into it too much, but finances is often a big one, you know? Do you find that there is like a specific way that successful marriages think about things like finances or parenting versus or struggling marriages, maybe not unsuccessful? Like, are successful marriages the ones that have, like, completely shared, accounts and things like that, or separate accounts, you know, or is it individual? And then in terms of parenting, like, Do successful marriages have, like, do they talk about, like, this is how we want to approach it versus, like, sometimes there's, like, a good cop, bad cop dynamic going on, you know?
And some people set it up as good cop, bad cop on purpose.
On
Like
purpose,
they
yeah.
intend that, right?
Mhm.
We're going to do that approach. But so let's go back to a piece of that and start with money.
Mhm.
Um, when we subdivide money, not how we carry out the accounts, that can be completely separate from this because I've had clients that were doctors, for instance, or attorneys who knew that they needed to protect the family assets.
Mhm.
So they did their accounting separately to protect the
Mhm.
family asset. They had a
Mhm.
particular reason of how they set it up,
Yeah.
but how they thought about it. Here's the reality. There are resources coming into a house and there are resources going out from a house. That's
Mhm.
the reality. How we think about it any other way is called mental accounting
Mhm.
for money psychologist. Mental accounting is making divisions where there aren't actually any, but they're figments of our imagination. We
Mhm.
fragment it out as a figment of our imagination.
Mhm.
So we have money coming in, money going out. We have resources coming in, sources going out. Thinking of it that way, it's a week.
Mhm.
It's our resource. How are
Mhm.
we going to deal with that? Leads to a very different conversation. So now let's go backtrack to those couples that were I was seeing before they got married. That was one
Mhm.
of the fights I would pick with them. So how are you
Mhm.
going to do your money?
Mhm.
And they came up with some of the most elaborate processes to try to figure out who contributed what to where and how they were going to make it equal or equitable or whatever it is
Mhm.
that they were using as their
Mhm.
reference point,
Mhm.
instead of simply going, oh, it's our resource. And so
Mhm.
after they struggled and struggled, I just kind of pointed out the fact that this is the reality.
Mhm.
And the more out of balance we had for the earners, the more tricky they got with how they were going to divide it out
Mhm.
instead of just going, this is our resource. And
Mhm.
how do we want to manage that? So, that could be how do we spend money? How do we
Mhm.
invest money? How do we understand what that resource is? Um, and and part of what I try to do is detoxify the whole symbolism of money. Money is
Mhm.
a way for them to store and use energy.
Mhm.
I earn my money by putting my energy out here. It comes in. Now, what am I going
Mhm.
to do with it? What does that
Mhm.
mean to us?
Mhm.
And when they begin to see it as this is our resource, that changes the conversations about what are we going to do with that.
Mhm.
Parenting is uh, only slightly different from that.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes when I say the we for parenting, people are like, but I don't parent the way my spouse does. But that's not what's required for being a we together. But can
Mhm.
we support each other?
Mhm.
So let's go with research. Research shows that kids, it's not whether they have a permissive parent or a strict parent that determines how they do, but how consistent the parent is,
Mhm.
even separately. Like if
Mhm.
one is permissive and the other is strict, as long
Mhm.
as they are consistently permissive and consistently strict and support each other in those actions,
Mhm.
kids do well, which is
Mhm.
kind of the ultimate goal of having
Mhm.
kids raised in healthy ways who leave the house psychologically healthy and strong. And so, can they support each other that they're not going to see things just alike, but they can talk about that? They don't have to
Mhm.
be doing it exactly alike, but they can support each other in that. And that's being
Mhm.
the team.
Mhm. Yeah. I think that's interesting because, like, I'm just reflecting back on, like, when I was a kid and, sometimes kids, like, they ask, like, okay, I'm going to go and ask, mom this, and mom says no. And so then you go and you ask dad, and, it's kind of like a crapshoot 50-50 if you're going to get the same answer or not. So, um, this is just a funny anecdote, but there's this story that my dad tells, like, my sister and I, she's 2 years older than me. So I don't know, maybe I was like 5 and she was 7 or something like that. And we were having this conversation, and my dad like overheard the conversation. We wanted something, right? And we were talking about, yeah, like we just have to wait until mom gets home and then we'll ask mom. And then he comes up and he's like, well, why don't you just ask me? And apparently we looked at him for like a good 30 seconds and we're just like, no, we'll wait till
Yeah.
mom gets home.
We're going to withhold this conversation.
Yeah. So, anyways, it's just funny. the ways that kids kind of like know what parent to go to for certain things. And then I guess like testing the boundaries of whether or not like one parent will give you the answer you want versus not, you know? So,
And which is interesting because when parents are in this together, and it's I'm not talking about can I have a candy bar or not, but I mean bigger
mhm.
issues, right?
Yeah.
Then the typical response is, "Let me talk with your
Mhm.
other parent.
Mhm.
We'll
Yeah,
talk
and
about
it
this."
should be, it should be like not for like the things that matter. You not like, oh, can I have a snack before bed or whatever. But um, speaking about kids, so one of the concepts that or one of the, like the pause button issues that I think becomes a big one for parents, is kids, and so then a lot of the time the relationship gets put on the back burner because of the kids and, pick up and drop off from school, all the extracurricular activities, and things like that. Um, how do parents make sure that they are continuing to put into you obviously want to raise your kids, in a healthy way and give them the attention that they need. But this concept that I've heard of making sure that your kids know that your wife or your husband is like the most important person and the kids are, this sounds horrible to say, but the kids are not the most important person, right? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Or can you expand on that concept?
Yeah, I don't think that sounds horrible. I think that sounds accurate,
Mhm.
for a couple of reasons. One is if kids think that they are the most important thing in the family, we
Mhm.
are breeding some narcissism in that.
Yes.
They're
Agreed.
developing in that first.
Mhm.
The second is that kids are meant to leave the family at some point to be their own person.
Mhm.
And if you make them the most important and they're gone, what's left?
Mhm.
And the third is that you make a vow that this is the most important person in your
Mhm.
your arena is your spouse. And so
Mhm.
when parents make it clear that they are the most important, that doesn't mean a time priority or a
Mhm.
money priority, but for them to
Mhm.
be able to be together in processes is more important than any other
Mhm.
relationship, puts the kids in a clear message that
Mhm.
that's what's real, right? That's what
Mhm.
you do. So then they
Mhm.
go do the same in their
Mhm.
families.
Mhm.
If they think that they are the most important one, they carry that into families too, into future relationships too. And so,
Mm.
letting them know where they stand, I think, is a piece of the puzzle. That doesn't mean you have to constantly tell them that they are not worth anything as opposed to the parent,
No.
but
No, no,
that
no.
what they see in the actions
Mhm.
show that.
Mhm.
And, so I think it's entirely appropriate for kids to know that their parents are the most important relationship. That relationship is the most important relationship in the household,
Mhm.
and that's how decisions are made. That's how things move forward.
Mhm.
I don't think that is, terrible to say. I think it is
Mhm.
actually healthy for kids to see that.
Well, and this is what I mean, I'm not a therapist, but this is what I've heard is that like when kids see that their parents are in a good relationship and when they see that they're making each other the priority, it actually gives them a sense of safety and security because they are relying on these people, right? So if the relationship between mom and dad is not going well, then their safety and security kind of comes into question.
Yeah.
Whether or not they
Uh,
know that's what they're thinking, but
so and it's an interesting question because, we're talking what is the important relationship, right? Not
Mhm,
who's the most important person in the household, but what's the
mhm,
most important relationship? And the
mhm,
marriage relationship is the most important one. Kids can't have an equal relationship with their parent.
mhm,
So to make that the most important one would be problematic right off the bat because it's all focused
mm,
on the child. The child
mhm,
is getting more of that because
mhm,
that's the nature of a child versus an adult.
mhm,
So this is really about not who is most important, but what relationship is most important
mm,
and how everything else can rally around that.
mhm. How do you think that changes, going from like newborn to like as the kids grow up and they become more independent? Because one of the things I think that a lot of people or a lot of marriages struggle with is when a newborn comes into the household, and especially for women who are going through like their body is healing, it can take months to heal for things like that. They're breastfeeding all the time. I mean, in Canada, we get 1 year maternity leave. I know it's not like that in the US. And, so it's like y- taking care of this baby. And if you're going through postpartum depression, you might not have the energy to put into the marriage. So how do you kind of overcome those I don't know, barriers isn't the right word, but struggles, I guess, the
That's called, yeah,
challenges.
challenges and struggles.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things that is true about a marriage is that you how you focus your energy is less important than how you feel like you're doing that together.
Mhm.
Like, do we feel like we're supporting each other through this difficult time? Do
Mhm.
we feel like we're a team in how we're raising this child together?
Mhm.
And even if you're working together, like I remember those days when we were passing, go get some sleep while I've got the baby, and
Yeah.
back and
Yeah.
forth it would go. But
Yeah.
knowing we were doing that together
Mhm.
felt very connecting, even if
Mhm.
we at that moment didn't have as much time for each other as we would like. We were doing it as a team. We were in this
Mhm.
together. And
Mhm.
so when I could see how hard we were doing that together, that made me feel connected. Just that fact.
Mhm.
And there were many times when one of us was just kind of sleeping against the other. That's still
Mhm.
connecting, but knowing that we had each other in that.
Yeah.
How that looks for different couples depends on how they decide to tackle that, but to feel like that they are in the process instead of responsibility defaulting to one person, but
Mhm.
to be able to say together, how are we going to do this? Like,
Mhm.
we have some challenges in front of us if we have a child. The fact is, this research shows that in adult life, one of the low points of week. And that is just the facts of how much it strains you and how much it takes away. And so, as much as people want to have this lovely time with the new baby and they're all excited, the fact is it's a drain.
Mhm.
And so, you can expect that there is going to be young children that are going to be a stressor on the family. Can
Mhm.
we be together in that stress? Can we accept that
Mhm.
we are stressed and maybe not making the most thoughtful choices along the way? So, can we give each
Mhm.
other some grace? But can we recognize that we're doing that
Mhm.
together?
Mhm.
Um, Knowing that that's the fact helps people to accept that maybe there's this run of time until kids are a little more self sufficient that it's gonna be a struggle.
Mhm.
I remember it for us. I'm watching it with, people around us now that are having kids and recognizing that that's the way it is. As much as we romanticize, what it's like to have a baby, the
Mhm.
reality is it's draining. It's
Yeah.
financially draining, it's energy draining,
Mhm.
it's physically draining, and
Mhm.
that's the fact. So you've made a choice to be parents that comes along with that. So how can we do it together?
Mhm. Mhm. So then would you say, like, are there different strategies that you then give to couples that are parents versus couples that are not parents?
The connection piece of them connecting together is regardless of how many kids
Mhm.
there are, whether there's kids or
Mhm.
not. That's the reality of that connection is there. The reality check is to be able to say you can expect that this is going to be an emotional, physical, financial drain on you.
Mhm.
How do you talk about that together? How do you
Mhm.
join together? So back
Mhm.
to the communication. If they're connected,
Mhm.
having those conversations about being connected and staying connected through those moments is a lot easier than if they're disconnected and then seeing each other as kind of the enemy.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what we're talking about. Are they on your side or are they against me? That's
Mhm.
the two pieces that can happen with
Yeah.
a couple.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the best ways to look at it is like you're like I'm not fighting you. I'm like you're not fighting me, but together let's tackle the problem, and looking at it that way. Like you're not the enemy, I'm not the enemy. The problem I don't is the enemy. And so
Yeah.
thinking at it that way and how can we come together as a team to tackle what the issue is rather than attacking each other.
Yeah. How do we stand together? I mean, that is
Yeah.
the big question. How do we stand together and remind ourselves that we're a team together? How do we,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes in healthy partnerships, to be able to say, remember, we're a team here.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, I've been married now 38 years.
Mm-hmm.
There are still points when we have to raise the question, how do we solve this as a team? It's not a one and done. You don't just
Mm-hmm.
become a we and now we've got this covered. But I can look back and go, okay, there were pivotal moments when we made a choice to turn toward each other rather than
Mm-hmm.
turn against each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I mean, if you don't want to go into your own personal relationship, that's fine. But like, what are some of the tools that you have personally used, given that you're in this line of work, that you like? Do you ever experiment on yourself and be like, hey, these things work? Or like, hey, this doesn't work so well? Or like, how has what you've learned changed your marriage and the way you approach your own marriage?
It certainly has. There's no way for it not to affect. My
Mm-hmm.
wife is a trained therapist also.
Oh,
So
okay.
we
So
both have a
you're,
background in
yeah.
that. And so one of our agreements is that we're not going to therapize each other. We're not
Mm-hmm.
going to coach each other, that's
Mm-hmm.
not how we do it. But we are open to the observation of the other. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. This has been years ago. My wife and both of us are fairly quiet people. I mean, we're not life of the party. So when we have conversations, they're pretty low key.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were having I'll put air quotes around conversation, meaning we were having an argument, but it's
Mhm.
stayed pretty civil in its tone. And I remember that she left to go do something in the middle of me kind of processing something, and she was
Mhm.
processing something. So she goes to take care of the laundry.
Mhm.
And as she was gone, I was thinking of my, my bullet points to help her see that she was wrong and I was right. And so I follow her to where the laundry was, and I raised my finger and she said, "Before you say anything, I just want to ask you a question. Is what you're about to say going to help us or harm us in our commitment to be together for the rest of our lives?" And I went, "Never mind. That's
Mhm.
not what this is about."
Mhm.
And so those moments of, "Can I share this thought with you?" are ways that we do that. That's a little harder and when couples are very disconnected, but the moments when we're able to remind ourselves to be a team,
Mhm.
and if you're connected, to be able to remind both of you together that you're a team is one of the more important places. Like,
Mhm.
we're here in a committed relationship. We're going to honor that commitment. We're going to work together. So how do we do that best?
Mhm.
And we've had other points when we've realized that we were opposing each other in something, and that's not helpful. But let me back up a minute, because some people will hear that and say that I think there should be no conflict.
Mhm.
The problem is that conflict can serve the relationship only when you see that conflict can improve the relationship.
Mhm.
If I'm trying to win an argument, if I'm trying to prove my point, it's not serving the relationship, it's serving me.
Mhm.
If I'm able to say, how do we solve this so that we both are moving forward? Our relationship is moving forward. That's a much more powerful way of thinking about it. So humans often get into one or the other, right?
Mhm.
We go, it's either this or this. And so
Mhm.
sometimes I'll hear people say, well, either I have to stay in this really unhappy relationship or I have to leave.
Mhm.
And my question is, where's the third option of maybe we make this a good relationship? And so
Mhm.
the same in our conversations of looking for the third option. You're worried about this. I'm worried about this. What is our third option in moving forward? There's almost always a third option.
Mhm.
And so using that, what's the third option here, is a way for couples to reframe their disagreement away from you or me to what is our best choice together.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. There's a couple more things that I wanted to touch on before we start wrapping up. But you've been doing this for quite some time, starting, you're finishing up your therapy licensing in the 80s. So you've been doing this for quite some time now. And I wanted to ask about, have you noticed any changes in marriage relationship dynamics from when you started to now? And kind of adjacent to that, especially since less people tend to be getting married, is there a difference? Like, do you treat or not treat? Do you help people? Do you coach people who are in committed relationships but not married? And what's the difference there?
So let's take the last, and I'll kind of back up.
Mm-hmm.
Committed relationships often have some of the same struggles as marriage. There is a slight difference,
Mm-hmm.
and research will back this up too. Um, when people are in committed relationships, there are very few barriers to leaving that are external, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to divorce. So you might have
Mm-hmm.
to sell a property or something, but
Mm-hmm.
the pieces that hold you together, the family expectations of what you're married, and all of those pieces that press in on a marriage are not there. You also haven't vowed to be together for the rest of your life. Now, that is, some people do that. They're just like, we are married, but we're not going to go through the marriage thing. But
Mm-hmm.
generally, people don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that does change a little bit of the psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are some subtle ways that sometimes people kind of do their best behavior, and are willing to let go of some things that they might not be willing to let go of if they went, well, this is for life.
Mm-hmm.
And so those do still creep in for some people, but there are plenty of people who are in committed relationships that psychologically they are committed enough that it runs like a marriage. It's
Mm-hmm.
that, but there are some pieces. So, um, this was years ago. I had a coworker. I was a young person who was running. So years and years ago, decades ago, I was running a sandwich shop for this person, and this other person was the other kind of assistant manager.
Mm-hmm.
And she had been dating her and living with her guy for forever.
Mm-hmm.
And they finally decided that they were going to get married. So they get married, and they lasted 6 months. And I was sitting
Mm-hmm.
there going, what happened after like almost 20 years together? What happened in 6 months? And what happened in 6 months was the psychological shift
Mm-hmm.
where she went, I realized that I was always a little bit protective because I'm like, if things get bad, I'll leave. And
Mm-hmm.
I was also trying to present myself best because I knew they could leave too. But now when we make this vow to be together forever, now the real stuff is coming out, and I realized that I could not put up with this, and this, and this, and I also
Mm-hmm.
was not being true to this, and this, and for myself, and so
Mm-hmm.
that is a shift that often happens for people that they don't see coming. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the last part. I still work with those people, and I still treat it in some ways, but I'm aware of those factors
Mm-hmm.
still in there.
Mm-hmm.
But to back up, have there been changes? There have been some. The underlying success of a marriage is always going to be, are we connected and are we a team? That's always
Mm-hmm.
going to be true. But how that gets carried out often has different personalities to it. So back in the 80s, we were still trying to resolve what are the gender roles.
Mm-hmm.
Strangely, we're kind of coming back to that these days for
Yes,
whatever reason,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it comes back around. But gender roles was a more defined issue then. And inequality was still at a point that many women felt like they were kind of trapped because they could not support themselves. That is not entirely not true now, but it's
Mhm,
less true. So
mhm,
we're at a place where both people are more able to make a fair decision. So
mhm,
that has changed a bit.
mhm,
One of the big things that has changed, though, is an expectation in marriage that a spouse will support a person's self expansion, meaning
mhm,
their own growth. And I don't
mhm.
mean therapy or seminars or whatever, but just am I growing as a person?
Mhm,
And that is one of the new and growing trends in what people say brings marital satisfaction. That they feel like their spouse supports their self expansion, to use the
Mhm,
kind of
mhm,
scientific term. That has changed. That continues to
mhm,
go up.
mhm,
And so I don't think that's going to change. I do watch the trends that you're talking about of people being less ready to marry at a younger age. So they're getting married older or not marrying at all.
mhm,
And so I think that trend will continue for a while just because of cultural pieces
mhm,
for a while. What
mhm.
we generally watch is that it kind of comes back to some
It
more centered
swings
point, but
back and
that
forth, yeah.
the pendulum swings.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Oh my goodness. I feel like we could have another whole hour and a half conversation about this. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you have as well.
It's been great.
Yeah. So where is the best place for people to find you if they're interested in learning more about your work, your books, your courses and stuff like that?
So I often use the analogy that when people get married, they get on a boat. So let's use that analogy. They're getting on the
Okay.
boat together, right? And
Yeah.
they're going down the river together of life. And
Mhm.
so for a while, they might not notice that there are some bends in this river that might trip them up. But let's say that they suddenly are aware that while they were on this wonderful little journey, that they suddenly hear there's a waterfall in the
Mhm.
distance, right? And
Mhm.
so they realize that early enough that they can turn around if they choose to and head the
Mhm.
other direction.
Mhm.
That's when they've hit the pause button.
Mhm.
The effects are setting in, but they're not at a crisis. They're just in a chronic state.
Mhm.
I created the Unpause app for people who are at that stage. The nice
Okay.
thing about an app is it actually reminds you to work on your habits. So it
Mm.
reminds you, have you done your morning exercise? Have you done your evening exercise? That's in the app, not like go out and take a walk or lift the weights,
Mhm.
but I mean, to do the
Yeah.
work that's in the
Yeah.
app. It's got training in it and some assessments, and that's at unpauseyourmarriage.com.
Okay.
So at unpauseyourmarriage.com, you do the unpause app. That's
Mhm.
to get away from the pause button. But let's say
Mhm.
you're not at a chronic state, you're now at a crisis state, and you can see the lip of the waterfall just ahead of you,
Mhm.
and that's the
Mhm.
time for the Save the Marriage system, and that's
Mhm.
at savethemarriage.com. That has the program there. It also has my podcast and a link to my books. But savethemarriage.com is if you're at a crisis point.
Okay, and we will put the links for those websites in the description. So,
Thank you.
thank you so much for being
Thank
here
you.
today. I feel like we could have you back for another episode.
I would love
So,
to.
yeah. So, okay, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
DJ Savvy.